What is your initial reaction? How do you assess the U.S. economy? Does it need more help from fiscal stimulus?
Well, thanks for having me, David. Well, we have had some encouraging news in recent weeks. Today we saw the job openings data for the month of August, which showed that even in the context of more than half of the U.S. labor market being in states that were either pausing reopening or outright reimposing lockdown restrictions, we've still recovered about 75% of the decline in March and April of job openings. And then, of course, last Friday we saw in the employment situation report for the month of September that the private sector added almost 900,000 jobs. And in a pre-2020 world, that would have actually been the third biggest monthly jobs gain on record. But certainly, we think that the U.S. economy could use some additional support, and that's why talks continue with congressional leadership. My colleague, Secretary Mnuchin, continues to engage with congressional leadership to try to get some bipartisan legislation that the president could sign into law, in particular focusing on support for sectors that could use some additional relief, particularly airlines, but also some sort of reload of the Paycheck Protection Program, which was highly successful in terms of preventing job losses among small businesses earlier this year. We also want to make sure that schools are getting the support they need to safely reopen and stay open, and also that we have a second round of economic impact payments and some degree of enhanced unemployment insurance assistance for unemployed Americans. So we would like to see some additional support, and my colleagues and I are working very hard to make sure that happens. We've been incredibly encouraged by the progress thus far observed.
I'm looking at it from the outside. It looks like you are working hard on it. We have discussions every day now, it appears, between the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, and the Secretary of the Treasury, Steve Mnuchin. But what's it going to take to get it done as a practical matter? Can it be done before the election?
Well, so I'm an economist, so I can't speak to the political hurdles, but I can say that there are areas where we agree in principle. And some of those include a second round of economic impact payments. They include support for airlines. They include PPP. And I think we just want to see a little bit more of a willingness to compromise on some of the issues like the dollar amount for state and local government assistance. So we're glad that the Speaker has come down a bit from the $1 trillion figure that really shouldn't have been involved in the conversation at all, because it was just an implausibly large figure that was not within the bounds of reality. But we still think that some of those figures are too high, and we want to see a specific cost breakdown before we start dishing out hundreds of billions of dollars in taxpayers' money.
One of the things that President Trump came to office very concerned about was the trade deficit. We got new numbers out today, and I believe that's the widest trade deficit since 2006. It appears that what's happening is the U.S. is importing more as our economy picks up, but exporting not as much because the rest of the world is really struggling. What can be done about that, if anything?
So you correctly observed that the trade deficit in goods and services did widen in the month of August. This was primarily a result of a few things. First of all, the U.S. is still predominantly a services economy, and so we have a goods trade deficit, but a big services trade surplus. And with goods trade recovering more rapidly than services trade, I think it's only natural that we would expect to observe a near-term widening in the trade deficit. It's also a sign of recovery in the domestic economy. There was a lot of inventory depletion in April, May, June, and now we're starting to see some inventory rebuilding, and that's reflected in the goods numbers as we import more inventory. And then finally, as you noted, it's also reflective of the fact that the U.S. economy both experienced a shallower contraction earlier this year and is also now experiencing a more rapid recovery than what we're seeing in a lot of our major trading partners.
So we saw, obviously, a dramatic fall off in the economy earlier in the second quarter, and then it bounced right back up to a significant degree, not all the way by a long shot, but a good way in the third quarter. What are you looking for in the fourth quarter? Is it going to continue to grow as fast? Because it looks to some that it may be slowing down that pace of recovery.
Well, if we cast our minds back to those horrific months of March and April, even in our most optimistic scenarios, the most optimistic we dared to be, I don't think any of us were expecting to observe an unemployment rate in September of 7.9%. Indeed, just a few months ago, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office was forecasting a year-end unemployment rate of 10.5%. And, to get from 10.2% unemployment in July to 7.9% unemployment in August was just a terrifically fast recovery. And there's a lot more work to do. I mean, the magnitude of contraction earlier this year was such that we have a lot more work to do. But to put that in perspective, it took 3 years for the unemployment rate to decline from 10% to 7.9% in the aftermath of 2008, 2009. So just the pace of this recovery, I think, dwarfs that of what we observed in the aftermath of 2008, 2009.
Yeah.
We're probably going to see a big third quarter, and whether or not we continue to see a robust recovery in the fourth quarter is going to depend on the pace of reopening. So we are expecting continued progress.
Tyler, in the meantime, we've had this development of the President of the United States being diagnosed with COVID-19 and quite a few members of the White House staff as well. Have things changed? Have the protocols changed at the White House to try to protect you all?
Well, look, from day one, the White House has taken unprecedented measures to ensure the health and safety of White House and Executive Office of the President employees. From very early on in the pandemic, we got daily temperature checks. Anyone who's going to be in close proximity to the President or the Vice President gets a test. We wear masks when we can't socially distance, and I think those protocols remain in place, and I think we're all just focusing on going about our daily jobs and adhering to protocol.